Kyle Larson says he's open to having an F1 test. More steam is picking up in regards to Dodge potentially returning to NASCAR, and multiple crew chief moves and changes are taking place for the 2022 season. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off with Busch Beer and Pit Bosses Girls partnership that they had this past weekend. According to Adam Stern, the Busch Beer Pit Boss Girls social contest during Sunday's NASCAR event at Phoenix to give away 7 Busch branded smokers was a top race-related trending topic on Twitter. The promotion deal drew 10,000 social media posts and 1.9 million impressions and 25,000 engagements per Zoom. It's unclear basically at this time who has won those, but I think it's really cool that Busch, and it's really cool to see that they're open to doing stuff like this, and it's really good promotion and gets the brand out there as well and gets NASCAR more out there as well. And people see that they're doing giveaways and stuff like this. I think that's one thing that really is going to open up more people potentially looking at this sport in a very long term. So I'm really excited about that. That's really awesome. That's really awesome news, and it's great to hear in my honest opinion. I'm really happy about this news overall for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Mano Swine. As was reported by multiple sources, that Mano Swine has a new license deal with NASCAR has a new licensing deal with KC-based wine bottle maker Mano Swine. I'm not sure what Mano Swine is. I think it's a wine company out in the Kansas City area. It is really cool that NASCAR is going out there and trying to get new brands into the sport. I think this is really awesome story overall for sure. Really happy about this. This is great news overall for sure. The more brands and partners that NASCAR can get overall as a whole, in my opinion, the better it's going to overall be. So this is really exciting news as a whole for sure. Congrats to them on this. Is a great partnership for Mano Swine, and I'm really looking forward to this for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeremy Clements. As Jeremy Clements Racing revealed that they have all of its primary sponsorships sold for the 2021 season. They're going to have 11 brands on the car throughout the 2022 season, and they will have First Pacific funding and All South Electric with 17 races combined, while the other 8 or 9 sponsors will sponsor the rest of the 16 races that the NASCAR Xfinity Series will have in the 2022 season. This is really awesome to see that Jeremy Clements' team is fully funded, and the reason that this is a huge deal is because now what they can do is they can go out and focus on trying to make their cars better going into next year. And I'll be honest, Jeremy Clements Racing this season, especially with getting that big funding from Pacific funding at the beginning of this year, that really helped this team because they were actually able to make the playoffs this year. And you never know, if this funding coming into the team, we could see major improvements from the organization as a whole. So this is definitely a really awesome story to see that Jeremy Clements Racing as an organization is getting some big upgrades, and it's probably going to help them in the upgrades department as well, because the more sponsorship they can get as a whole, the better the team is overall going to be. So this is definitely really awesome as a whole. Really happy about this, and I'm glad to see that he is fully sponsored for the 2022 season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Alex Bowman. As Alex Bowman is officially going to be running the 2022 Chili Bowl Nationals. He's the first NASCAR Cup Series driver and driver in NASCAR that has confirmed that they will be running the Chili Bowl Nationals. A lot more drivers are expected to reveal that they will run the Chili Bowl Nationals in the near future. Drivers like Kyle Larson will probably be running it, Christopher Bell. You'll probably see guys like Chase Briscoe, Ryan Newman who are going to run, but Alex Bowman is officially the first driver that is going to be running in the event. Alex Bowman has done pretty decent in the Chili Bowl. I don't think he's ever made it to the A main, but I believe he's made it to the B or C mains in the past in his own cars. So this is definitely something that's really awesome to see, that Alex Bowman is going to run the Chili Bowl, because there's more eyes and ears on it, and more fans, especially Alex Bowman fan base, is definitely going to go check out the Chili Bowl this year. He has competed in multiple times and has done pretty well as a whole, so I'm really happy to see that he will be competing in the Chili Bowl in 2022. This is definitely a really exciting story for the Alex Bowman fan base. Really exciting stuff for sure, and I'm happy to see that going into next season, we will see Alex Bowman drive in the Chili Bowl. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chase Elliott. As Chase Elliott is going to be running the USAC Midget race at Placerville Speedway on a couple weeks from now at the Hangtown, at the big event in Flavorville Speedway at the Hangtown 100, and also will be competing against his teammate in the Cup Series, Kyle Larson, at that event. Chase Elliott has been branching out during the offseason, and last year he did a lot of events during the offseason, and once again, he'll be running a couple events. I believe he ran a sprint car race not too long ago, and now he'll be doing another USAC midget race. So this will be really, really awesome. I can see Chase Elliott overall competing for the chance to win. Depends on if Kyle Larson doesn't have any problems, because I think if Kyle Larson doesn't have any problems, I think he's going to overall win the event, since Kyle Larson is arguably the best dirt racer in the country right now. But honestly, you really never know how Chase Elliott is going to do. So I do think that this is really, really exciting overall for sure, that they're basically going to be able to do this, and I'm glad that Chase Elliott is going to run out in different events. And it's going to keep him focused going into 2022, because let's be honest, I think Chase Elliott does need a little bit more focus going into next season, considering Kyle Larson pretty much dominated. And going into next year car, even though the car is going to be much different going next year, you still want to keep your focus going into the next particular season. So this is definitely really exciting. He will be competing in the race against Kyle Larson. You probably have to go up against guys like Kyle Larson. There's probably going to be other racers from the dirt ranks that are going to be competing in this event. So this is really, really awesome as a whole. Really excited to see this, and I'm glad to see that Chase Elliott is going to be getting in the USAT event at Placerville. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ryan Ellis. As Ryan Ellis is going to be driving part-time with Alpha Prime Racing in the 2022 season, with Keen Parts and CorvetteParts.net sponsoring him for a few races. He is expected to be in 5 races with Alpha Prime Racing in the 2022 season. It's already been confirmed that Cesar Baccarella, Tommy Jomarts, who are the 2 owners of the team, and Roger Krug will be driving with the team. And now we know for sure that Ryan Ellis will be joining the team in the 2022 season. This is really, really exciting. I think Ryan Ellis is a very, very talented driver, but for a long time he has struggled with sponsorship. But the fact that he does have a sponsor that is willing to sponsor him and give him good opportunities is really, really awesome. Depending on how good these cars are, I can see Ryan Ellis surprise a lot of people this year in those 5 select starts, depending on what starts he runs. It's not been announced. Again, it's not been announced which races Ryan Ellis is going to run in 2022. But this team overall as a whole is really building, in my opinion, a super team right now, especially with their young talents. I think that their team is starting to become a really, really formidable team. It's unclear how good their team will be next year, but I think that they have a good team going right now. I like what's going on. I like the future of this team. This is really, really exciting news, and I'm happy about this overall for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the top markets for NBC viewership this season. It was reported by Adam Stern that Knoxville was the top market for NASCAR Cup ratings on NBC sports channels in 2021. A lot of the top 10 cities, a lot of top 10 areas were basically from the Southeast area, and also were from the Tennessee area as well. But the fact that you have 2 of the biggest cities being for NASCAR in the Tennessee area is definitely really, really exciting as a whole, that Knoxville has a major market right there. And there's a reason why Tennessee has 2, and potentially they may end up having 3 races going into the future, because you have a huge market in the Tennessee area and a huge market in the Southeast area. I know the NASCAR is trying to right now focus on trying to get more people from like the West Coast right now in areas like LA, and trying to get down into other areas in the country like up in the East Coast like New York and stuff. But at the same time, when you look at these top markets for viewership, it always is tracks up in the Tennessee areas, like in Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Those tend to be the biggest areas in the country when it comes to viewership. So this is definitely something that's really interesting overall as a whole. But at the same time, I do think it's a really, really big story, and I'm very interested to see what happens if NASCAR long-term will try to go into that area, or if NASCAR will continue to try to chase the West Coast. I'll be honest, they're probably going to continue trying to chase the West Coast, but we'll have to see what happens going forward in regards to that. But that was a pretty big story, and definitely an interesting story for sure as a whole. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the upcoming Next Gen test. Now, Bob Parker's reported on the Next Gen test, and he says at the Next Gen test next Wednesday, Thursday at Charlotte Oval, teams will use shorter exhaust pipes, windshield ducts, and rear window slits that were tried during road course tests to help with the heating situations in the cars. Also, they actually were testing 3 cars earlier today as well at the Charlotte Oval, with the Trackhouse car, the SHR car, and a Joe Gibbs Racing car, with 3 drivers that were not confirmed, but there were 3 drivers testing it today. They were testing something with the steering and rack components on the cars, because there's been a lot of complaints about the steering rack situations on the cars as well. The other big concern has been the heat, and Dale Jr. actually talked about this on his podcast on the Dale Jr. Down, that they were getting about 150 degrees in the car, and it was becoming to a point where it was becoming extremely dangerous, especially for the drivers in the cars. Don't get me wrong, these NASCAR cars are supposed to be hot, but they can't be to the point where drivers are absolutely uncomfortable and they do not entirely feel comfortable in these cars. So at least NASCAR is doing something different. At least NASCAR is trying new things, but there have been a lot of concerns about the safety of the car as well. And keep in mind, we are less than 3 months from the season technically starting. The season technically starts on February 6th, and you want to make sure that this car is rightfully ready to go and is set up ready for the drivers. Because if the car is not ready to go, well, if the car is not 100% ready and drivers are not really feeling comfortable, the fans are not going to enjoy it. Fans are not expecting this car to be perfect, but fans are expecting the car at least to be up to par. And if you have issues like heating and stuff, and that's something they probably will fix as the year goes on, but if you can't get that situation fixed sooner than later, it is going to become a much bigger problem than it currently is at the moment. So hopefully, if they do this stuff, because again, they tried this stuff and actually did help with the heating a little bit, and hopefully from today with the steering rack and bonus, because remember, there is a big next-gen test that is going to be happening on November 17th and 18th. Next week, there will be a test going on at this time at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. So that's something we're going to have to see how that test goes, but this is something that's really, really interesting. I think it's a big story that definitely 100% needs to be covered. Big story overall for sure, and we'll see what happens going forward, but this definitely is something that we're going to have to keep our eyes on in the long term. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dave Eilons, as Dave Eilons is going to become the crew chief for Erik Jones in 2022 in the number 43 car. This was already expected to be announced, but this was confirmed yesterday or 2 days ago that he would become the crew chief for Erik Jones next season. This, in my opinion, is exactly a major, major pickup for Richard Petty Motorsports. This, no offense to Jerry Baxter, but I do think that Dave Eilons has a lot of talent as a crew chief. He's helped out and won championships in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He got a championship for William Byron in Xfinity. He got a championship for Tyler Reddick in 2018. And with Noah Grace, he had 3 pretty solid years as a whole. And this year, he was able to make the championship for as a crew chief. So I do think that this is a major, major and really awesome story that we get to see Dave Eilons finally get promoted to the Cup Series. There have been rumors a few years ago that he potentially was going to go up to the Cup Series when Chad Canals was let go, and that he was going to be in crew chief for William Byron, but we found out that Rudy Fiegel was going in there, which I thought was a lot better of a deal anyways for that team. But at the same time, I think the fact that they have a big pickup, I think this also is going to help Erik Jones. There's going to be someone he's going to be working that is a little bit younger, who knows how to get it done. I think Erik Jones has a ton of talent. And like I said, I think Dave Eilons knows how to get it done as a crew chief. So I do think overall that this is a major, major pickup for them. This is really, really exciting. And I'm happy to say that Dave Eilons is officially going to be the crew chief for Erik Jones in 2022. Because of this, we did not know where Jerry Baxter was going until a few hours ago, because it was officially announced a few hours ago that Jerry Baxter will be crew chiefing for Tanner Grace in the number 15 truck next year at DJR Racing in 2022. Jerry Baxter, though, I will say this. He is a very, very good crew chief, but he is 63 years old, so he's getting older. So this definitely is one of the biggest and most surprising stories, I think, of this year going into next year. But I will say this is a really, really big pickup for the DJR Racing camp going into 2022. Because I think that Tanner Gray needs a crew chief, because for whatever reason, I think Tanner Gray had 6 different crew chiefs last season. So I think having a consistent crew chiefing pattern going into next season, I think is going to work out a lot better for Tanner Gray. I think Tanner Gray does have a lot of talent. I mean, the guy won an NHRA Pro Stock Championship a few years ago, and he's only been in stock cars for a few years. And it takes time for someone to learn. And the problem for Tanner Gray, like I said, is he hasn't had enough experience, and he hasn't had one simple crew chief throughout the season. With him only having Jerry Baxter next season, I do think that this is going to work out a lot more in his favor than it's not going to end up working out in his favor. I'm really happy to see that Jerry Baxter has been able to find a home going into next season. I think, like I said, this is a really, really big up for the DGR camp. It does look that Jerry Baxter will not be returning to Richard Petty Motorsports in the Cup Series next year, but I do think that Jerry Baxter could help Tanner Gray become a really, really solid and a really solid caliber talent in the Truck Series next year. Hope he can help him out. I think that this is a good pickup, and I'm really excited to see that he will be going over to that team next year and working with DJR Racing. He's been in the Truck Series for a long time. He's been crew chief for a lot of time, and I think he could be a really good insight in helping him out going into next season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode. as we're talking about Jeremy Thompson, as Jeremy Thompson is going to become the director of competition at RoushFenway Racing in 2022. Jeremy Thompson, there's a lot of things, because Brad Keselowski is going to move over there. And one thing that's really interesting is Jeremy Thompson actually was a competition director at Brad Keselowski Racing in the Truck Series when that team was around. So Jeremy Thompson knows how to get it done. I mean, they were able to contend for many, many wins and contend for a couple championships, including in 2000, I believe in 2015 when Tyler Reddick was a championship contender that year. And they won a lot of races, guys like Brad Keselowski, Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, among others who competed for championships in that series. And that team was very, very successful. So I think that this is a really, really awesome move overall as a whole, that they can get someone like Jeremy Thompson to be the competition director of competition for that team overall. It's a big thing. I think it's top direct competition for the overall organization. I think this is a big team. There were a lot of other people that were announced. We'll talk about the next driver person here that was announced for the team in a second, but there were a lot of big people from multiple other teams. Some people from Chip Ganassi Racing were brought over by Matt McCall, and there was one other person that was announced, and we'll get into that now. And now we'll jump on to the next story, as we'll talk about TJ Majors, as TJ Majors is going to be spotting for Brad Keselowski in 2022. Near the end of the season, around 14 or 15 weeks left in the 2021 season, Team Penske made some spotter changes. They moved Brad Keselowski's old spotter, Colin Presley, over to work with Joey Logano, and they moved TJ Majors over to work with Brad Keselowski for the rest of the 2021 season. A lot of speculation started going around that TJ Majors was going to be the spotter for him next season, and we ended up being right. I think that TJ Majors is an excellent spotter. The guy knows how to get it done. He's won many races with Dale Jr. He won a championship, I believe, with Joey Logano in 2000. I think he won a championship with Joey Logano in 2018. And he's been a very, very excellent spotter throughout his entire career. And like I said, I think that this is an excellent and a really big pickup for the team overall as a whole. So I am overall really excited to see that TJ Majors is going to be working. I know he's very, very controversial on the Door Bumper Clear podcast, but at the same time, the guy knows how to get it done as a spotter. I think he's going to be really, really big for this team next year. That 6 team, I think, will be a very surprising contender next year. Not only are you going to have a really good driver in the 6 car next year, but not only are you going to have a great crew chief in Matt McCall, who was really good with Kurt Busch this season, but you're also going to have TJ Majors. You have a really good combination of people, and when you have chemistries, I feel like the Matt McCall and Brad Keselowski are going to have a lot of chemistry next year. So I really do believe this is a really, really good move, in my opinion, to bring TJ Majors as a spotter going into next year. I'm really excited about this, and I'm happy to see that TJ Majors will be working with Brad Keselowski in the 2022 season. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brian Wilson. As Brian Wilson is moving up to the Cup Series, and he'll be crew chiefing for Harrison Burton in the 2022 season. I've always wanted Brian Wilson to jump up to the Cup Series. I think he has been an excellent crew chief in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He crew chief for Austin Erik the last couple of years. He crew chief for him in 2019 and got him a couple wins on road course that year. And in 2020, got, I believe, his first Xfinity Series championship as a crew chief. And this year nearly won the championship before Daniel Hemrick gave him the bump and run. But I think that Brian Wilson absolutely deserves this promotion. I think for Harrison Burton, especially a driver who is going to be a rookie next season, I overall think that this is a major, major pickup for the organization, because Jonathan Hassler is moving over to work with Ryan Blaney next year. So I think Brian Wilson getting promoted up to the Cup Series next year, I really do think overall that this is going to be a much more excellent move than a negative move, in my opinion. And I think it is at the same time. It is going to help out Harrison Burton in the Cup Series next year. I think that what Harrison Burton really needs is someone who has a lot of experience. And I know that Brian Wilson overall does not have a ton of experience in the NASCAR Cup Series. I don't know how many starts he has, but he does have a lot of crew chiefing experience. He's been in this series for a very, very long time. Really, ever since Brad Keselowski had Jeremy Bones promoted up to the Cup Series to work with Ryan Blaney, he's been working with this team. So I think that Brian Wilson absolutely 100% deserves to be up in the Cup Series. I've been wanting this for a very, very long time. I think it will help Harrison Burton be a much more competitive driver in the Cup Series than he already, I think, will be. I think he'll be pretty decent in the Cup Series, but I think with Brian Wilson coming in and working with him next year, I think that this is going to be a much better move. So I'm really happy to see that Brian Wilson is moving up to the Cup Series to be a crew chief. I think this is a good move, and I'm really happy about this for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Team Penske. Now, Bob Proctor's reported this about the same time when the Brian Wilson announcement came out, and they said that plans for an Xfinity Series program for next year for Team Penske are still to be determined on whether it will field the car in 2022. There's been a lot of rumors going around about the Team Penske NASCAR Xfinity Series car. There have been rumors that were circulated around July. Jordan Bianchi talked about this, I think, when he had a Q&A recently with The Athletic. He talked about how basically at this given moment right now, what they're expected to do is they are expected to have multiple Cup Series drivers, an all-star car with multiple Cup Series drivers driving the car, and a fewer lower-tier drivers driving in the car as well, which is something definitely you can see. Drivers like Harrison Burton, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney in that car, and also other drivers who drive for the team in Austin or two, and maybe a couple other drivers get into that car. But if I was Team Penske, I would try to get a driver into your full-time car. There are a few drivers that potentially could be. First one, Anthony Alfredo. Anthony Alfredo, we know now, is not going to be returning to Ferrari Motorsports. And I think Anthony Alfredo should go back down to the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And I think if he would go to a team right now, my choice would definitely be Team Penske. He's a driver that's been in the 4 camp this year. And I think he would do very, very well going over to that team and working with them. So he definitely is my first choice. My second potential choice would be a driver like Ernie Francis Jr. Now, Ernie Francis Jr., we know, has been testing in Indy Lights and potentially could go over there, so this is why he's not my favorite right now. But if Ernie Francis Jr. decides to leave the Indy Lights and come over to NASCAR, I think because Team Penske said that they definitely would 100%, since he has funding from Camping World, he could definitely be a really, really good potential driver to go there. Another driver that potentially could go, if they go to one full-time driver next year, another driver definitely, I would 100% say Todd Gillen. Todd Gillen has been in the 4 camp for the last couple of years when he joined Ferrari Motorsports in the Truck Series in 2020, joined that team, and has been very, very successful. And I've been wanting Todd Gillen to officially move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I don't think he's ready to jump up to the Cup Series with Ferrari Motorsports, but I think he would do very, very well if he would jump up to Xfinity Series. And I think that Team Penske, and I'm saying, he definitely should be a consideration for that ride. So he's definitely a driver that you should put up for consideration to go there. I know people bring up Hailie Deegan and maybe running part-time with the team, but I think if Hailie Deegan runs part-time in Xfinity, she'll go to SHR. I do believe long-term that she'll be taking over for Kevin Harvick long-term, but I believe that if they do go full-time next year, I think there's a chance Team Penske's group will have multiple cars, but if they go with one full-time driver, I think it'll be between Todd Gillen and Anthony Alfredo, and I think they may go with a more experienced guy like Anthony Alfredo. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but I think that's a really, really big story, something that we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward. A pretty big story overall as a whole is something we have to wait and see in regards to the future of that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Danny Kvyat. Now, Danny Kvyat spoke about his future in racing, and he said in an article by, I believe, Racer.com, and he says that he has had talks with people in NASCAR about potentially racing in NASCAR. Now, Danny Kvyat recently was at Martinsville Speedway for the second to last race, and he said he really enjoyed the event. He talked to multiple people, and he says he has had talk with conversations, and he said he could fit in to potentially one of the three top divisions in NASCAR overall. Now, Danny Kvyat's future really unknown. Danny Kvyat has competed in Formula 1 basically for the majority of his career, but unfortunately lost his ride at the end of last year and has basically been out of racing for a while, but he started growing back into love with NASCAR. Now, he's not the only driver that has had interest in NASCAR in this past year. You've had drivers like Daniel Ricciardo who have been interested maybe running some Xfinity Series races, but you also have a huge rush of open-wheel drivers and IndyCar drivers that have shown interest in potentially running in NASCAR. Guys like Marco Andretti, Santino Ferrucci, who's driven multiple starts. We've seen other drivers like Romain Grosjean one time was talking about maybe running an oval race one day in NASCAR. Danny Kvyat going to NASCAR, though, would definitely be the last driver that I would have thought would have potentially been them. But at the same time, I think it would be really awesome to have the ex-Formula 1 driver come over to NASCAR and run at least one or two events. Now, if he was to run, who would he run for? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. It probably would be a team that's mid-pack or farther in the back of the pack, because let's be for real, there's not a ton of rides that are available currently in the NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity Series right now. So I don't think it could go full-time. But there are potentially other teams that could be available, so that's something we're going to have to wait and see. But I do like that Danny Kvyat is definitely interested. I think it'd be really, really cool to have a driver like Danny Kvyat come over. I think it would be really, really exciting for the NASCAR world if we could get a driver, because he also could bring his people from Russia over to NASCAR and we get some Russia fans watching because you see Danica beat on the big screens. I think it'd be really, really awesome, and maybe we're going to see him in NASCAR, but we'll have to wait and see long term if that does happen. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the rumor regarding the Xfinity Series driver potentially running, a full-time Xfinity Series driver running in the Cup Series. As reported by Chris Knight about an hour or two ago, he says that a full-time NASCAR Xfinity Series driver is Cup-bound for some races in the 2022 season. Now, the big question is, who potentially could be the drivers? I think that there are not just going to be one driver that's going to be jumping up and running select starts. I think there's actually going to be two full-time Xfinity Series drivers that are going to be running part-time in the Cup Series. The first driver I'm going to say is Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson, I believe, will make a few starts in the Cup Series, and the reason is because of Beard Motorsports. Noah Gragson has a connection with the Beard Motorsports group. The Beard Motorsports team has basically had drivers from, of course, Las Vegas, Brendan Gaughan. And Noah Gragson is from Las Vegas. So he has association with them, and he actually attempted to qualify for the Daytona 500 with that team in the 2021 season. So he almost made that Daytona 500, but they didn't make any starts later in the season. But they have confirmed that they'll be running next year on all the super speedways. I think Noah Gragson will run part-time with the team next year on all the super speedway tracks. I think he'll be the first confirmed driver that will run next year. But the other driver that I think is full-time in Xfinity that is going to jump up to the Cup Series next year on a part-time basis, I think is actually going to be Daniel Hemric. Now, hear me out when I say this. Daniel Hemric is going to be moving away from Joe Gibbs Racing, and he's going to be moving over to Kaulig Racing in 2022. Right now, AJ Allmendinger is going to be running 12 to 15 starts in the Cup Series next year, but will not run full-time. So, they're going to need a driver a couple drivers potentially, to fill out some of those races for the rest of the year. Daniel Hemric does have select Cup Series starts, and I think the guy that won the championship in Xfinity, it would be rightfully awesome to see him jump up to the Cup Series next year on a part-time basis. So I think for sure that we're going to see Noah Gragson jump up to the Cup Series next year, but I also believe that Daniel Hemric will be the other driver that is unknown right now that jumps up to the Cup Series and runs the races that AJ Allmendinger isn't going to run this year. Now, I don't think that he'll run every single race that is based still available, but I do think that AJ will. We know that AJ is running 12 to 15, so I think that Daniel Hemric will potentially run 11 to 12 races, and then the rest of those races potentially could be filled out by a driver that's not available at the time. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that in the future of that. But I do believe that those will be the two official drivers that are going to jump up. I think it'd be really awesome if they could get both those drivers to run. I think it would be really awesome as a whole. I think I would definitely be really, really exciting. And I'm looking forward to see who they eventually end up deciding to take into their car. I think this would be something we'll have to wait and see. But I'm really excited to see who ends up going those Cup starts next season. And now we'll jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about NASCAR on NBC viewership for the 2021 season. The NBC PR team basically released the NASCAR and NBC viewership, their side of the viewership for this year. And they say that 2021 was the most streamed season on record for the Xfinity and Cup Series ever. Cup viewership averaged 2.562 million viewers, and this is up from 2.560 million in 2020, which is only up about 2,000 viewers. Also, NBC Sports Xfinity Series coverage was the most since the 2018 season. There's actually a lot of positives on this. Even though it's not a major game for the NASCAR Cup Series, at least there's a little bit positive momentum going on in NASCAR on NBC. Now, I do think going into next year with NBCSN dropping off of USA Network, I think viewership will go up a lot more than it is. But there is a positive in regards to that. The Cup viewership was up very, very slightly. Now, it doesn't help that there were multiple races here that were rain delayed and also flipping back and forth of channels. Definitely was a big issue. But one thing that's also positive from this, at least for sure, is the fact that there wasn't that massive dropout that we've seen over the last couple years. And we'll talk about overall Cup viewership here in just a second. But the fact that the Cup viewership this year the fact that the NBC viewership this year really wasn't down at all, it actually went up this year, is a bigger positive. Now, one thing going forward is if the next gen card succeeds, can the ratings stay up and continue going up overall? that's something that we're going to have to wait and see on. But I really do hope and pray that there's a chance that they continue to see ratings increases, especially I think next year. If there's no issues, the car goes really, really well next year, I think viewership will increase. And I think for the first time, because I think this is the first time since 2009 that they've had more than half of the races on main NBC and main Fox. I think that's something that's really, really exciting. I'll have to wait and see in regards to that, but I think the viewership gains, at least on that front, are something that's definitely really, really exciting for sure. Good news overall for that, in my opinion. I think this is really, really good news overall, to be perfectly honest with you, on the viewership side of things. And the fact that we have the most streamed this year for Xfinity and Cup, I think a lot of it is core cutting at the same time, too, which I think is why the viewership isn't higher than it is probably another big reason right there. But that's definitely really good news overall for sure. Big story as a whole, and I'm glad to see viewership for NBC was up this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about NASCAR viewership as a whole for the 2021 season. It was reported by Adam Stern that if including the weather-impacted Daytona 500, there have been 2.93 million viewers, which is off slightly from 3.051 million in 2020 and 3.11 million in 2019. If excluding Daytona 500, which is race 2 through 36, we'd had 2.866 million viewers, which is basically flat from 2020, which had 2.906 million, and 2019, which had 2.871 million. Despite a lot of the hype around the season, the ratings really did not go up a lot. Now, there are a lot of factors that did come into effect. You had a lot of weather-impacted races this year. Races like Bristol Dirt, which got moved to Monday. Of course, the Daytona 500, which had the lowest viewed Daytona 500, I believe, in the history of the Daytona 500s, at least for the last 20, 30 years. The least rated Daytona 500. And it was less watched than this year's Indianapolis 500. Thanks, TV Times, for that. But you also had other races like Talladega, which could have been a big boom with Bubba Wallace winning. That could have been huge. That race got moved to Monday, and that race actually got moved to NBCSN. On top of that, you also had a couple of races that were affected by rain at the same time. Martinsville got affected by rain, among other races this year that got affected by rain overall as a whole. All the big things that could have been big momentum for NASCAR, unfortunately, got affected by rain. But at the same time, it didn't have a major drop. I talked about it a second ago, but I'm really happy, at least for sure, that there wasn't that major and massive drop-off that we've seen throughout the years in NASCAR's ratings. Because for whatever reason, the last couple weeks, and I do think that this is an issue with the season being as long as it is, and with NASCAR cutting into the NFL season, we always see for the last 4 or 5 races a massive drop. We haven't really seen that, which is definitely something really, really interesting. So going into next year, I hope the ratings start going up. I do think there's a really, really chance for that potentially to happen next year. At least we're not much off. It's actually basically flat from 2008, from basically the last couple of years, which isn't really a bad thing. Again, it is a little bit down, but it is what it is. I think they said that it was down 4% in ratings overall across, but it was more and more households, which means I think less people had TV, and there's a lot of cord cutting going on at the same time. So that's something that's really, really interesting and really, really big overall. And that's the whole TV viewership for the 2021 season. This is definitely a big story, and I'm glad we covered it today on the channel. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about ThorSport Racing. Now, Angela Thorson, who works basically at ThorSport, she basically confirmed on a Sirius 7 NASCAR radio that Ben Rhodes and Matt Crafton are going to be returning to the team in the 2022 season, and the team will run 4 trucks next year, with the other 2 drivers at this moment to be announced. No surprise in Ben Rhodes and Matt Crafton are returning to the team. Ben Rhodes won the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series Championship in the 2021 season, and Matt Crafton is a 3-time champion. Now, we don't know who's going to be the crew chief for Matt Crafton. That was not announced, but we know that both those guys are going to be returning. Doesn't surprise me. They do bring sponsorship and funding, and of course, they're champions of the team. The big question is, who's going to end up in the other 2 rides for next season? Now, the first driver to potentially come back to the team, Johnny Sauter. Johnny Sauter's been in the Truck Series for a very, very long time, but I'll be honest, Johnny Sauter has been pretty much washed up in the Truck Series, and this is not trying to be word, but I think that Johnny Sauter has not been as good as he used to be when he was over at GMS. Ever since coming back to ThorSport, he has only won 1 race since returning to ThorSport, and I really thought when he was coming back to ThorSport, I really thought that he was going to be a much better driver. But let's be honest, he really has not done anything since coming back to ThorSport Racing. He's missed the playoffs the last 2 years. He barely made the playoffs in 2019, and he absolutely struggled in the 2019 season. So I think that if they had to choose, I would move Johnny Sauter from the team. So who do I think are the 2 drivers? First driver I think is going to be Christian Eckes. Christian Eckes won in the 98 car, and Christian Eckes really wants to return to the team. And I believe that Toyota is going to want to keep him in the team. He got the 98's only win of the season. Grant Enfinger, surprisingly, did not win a race with the ThorSport camp this year. But I think Christian Eckes, after the win in Las Vegas, I think he will be one of the drivers that goes to the team. The other driver that I think is actually, though, going to end up at the team, and this may shock you a little bit, but I think that the other driver is going to be Ty Majeski. Now, hear me out when I say this. Ty Majeski has driven a few sled starts for ThorSport Racing, and I believe currently at the moment, I believe he is employed at ThorSport Racing as a photo recently process with Ben Rhodes had a drinking game, and Ty Majeski took the photo. So I think that it's going to be Ty Majeski and the other driver I just mentioned, Christian Eckes, at the team. So I think that the lineup for next year, and I think this should be the lineup in my opinion, it'll be Ben Rhodes, Matt Crafton, Ty Majeski, and Christian Eckes. I think you'll have a good lineup right there. You're going to have all drivers who have contended for wins or have shown chances to win races. I think those should be the 4 drivers. Ty Majeski also had a few really strong starts in the truck series this year in that 5th ThorSport car. So I'm really happy about that for sure. Really happy to see that those for sure are the 2 drivers confirmed. I expected those 2 to come back, and I think that the 2 other drivers are going to end up being the other 2 we talked about. So hopefully we'll get more news in regards to that soon in those 2 drivers. They're expected to be announced at a later date, but it's definitely a big story and something we definitely had to cover here on the channel. And now we're going to go on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, Kevin Harvick basically when it was revealed that Gear Wrench was going to be going over to Kevin Harvick, basically confirmed that Kevin Harvick had a 2-year extension with the Gear Wrench company, them coming over, and confirmed that Kevin Harvick would be returning through the 2023 season. Now, Kevin Harvick says that he does not want to retire anytime soon, and like I said, his contract does run through the 2023 season. Now, Kevin Harvick this year definitely had a down year for his own standards. Kevin Harvick had his first winless season since the 2009 season, the first time in 12 seasons where he has failed to win a NASCAR Cup Series race. But even with that, Kevin Harvick, even despite not winning a race, he still had a pretty good year for his standards, even a year that SHR was down. I believe that Kevin Harvick had 10 top 5s and 24 top 10s this season with like a 10th or 11th place average finish. So he still, regardless of that, he still had a really good year for his standards, in my honest opinion. And to me, I think Kevin Harvick still can get it done. Now, Kevin Harvick, of course, is getting a lot older as a driver. Kevin Harvick is going to be 40, I believe is turning 46, or already is 46 at the end of this year. And he's going to be the oldest full-time NASCAR Cup Series driver in the 2022 season. So it's unclear how much more he wants to race. Now, I think that Kevin Harvick, for sure, at least is going to race for the contract. But do I think that after 2023, do I believe that Kevin Harvick is going to retire? I actually believe that he's going to. And here's the reason. I actually believe that Kevin Harvick is not going to be a fan of the next-gen car. And I know we haven't seen the next-gen car race at this time. But I believe that Kevin Harvick is going to retire in the next 2 years. I think a couple reasons. One, I don't think he overall is going to be a fan of the next-gen car. And number 2, I think that Kevin Harvick is going to, with him being 48, his son Keelan, I believe, is going to be by 2023 around 12 to 13 years old. And Keelan right now is, no, Keelan, I'm wrong. Keelan will be about 11 years old when he basically retires. And Keelan actually is already racing in like go-karts right now and other racing at the moment. So I believe that Kevin Harvick at some point is going to retire and focus on trying to help Keelan get an opportunity. I think that they're potentially going to also see Kevin Harvick get back into the ownership game side of things. He's got a management company with multiple drivers like Ryan Preece and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. right now. And he's going to want to put, I think Keelan Harvick's already part of the KHI management group already, despite him not even racing in NASCAR's top divisions. I think that he's going to retire sooner or later, but I think that he will at least go through his contract in 2023. This is definitely a really, really big story. I'm glad we talked about this because I think this is something we'll have to keep an eye on going forward, and we'll see more about this in the near future in NASCAR. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, and we're going to talk about Toyota. Now, this is the only IndyCar story on today's episode, and this is reported by Adam Stern. Toyota has had discussions about becoming IndyCar's third manufacturer for the near future. They've had discussions with friends in the garage. They also talk about they've had friends in all other series and are watching things closely like other forms of racing. Toyota has a major staple in racing world. They have a major staple in NASCAR. They have a major staple currently in WEC. They have a major staple. They're potentially going to be joining the LMDH class. They have a major stuff, and I believe they're in Formula E too. So they've had a big branch in all different types of motorsports. So it would not entirely surprise me if Toyota would be a potential third new manufacturer. It had been reported by a French, basically by, I think it was a French TV, that this was something that was going on behind the scenes. And this sounded really interesting if Toyota does become the third manufacturer. Now, they have had affiliation with IndyCar in the past. I believe they had affiliation from the late 90s to the early 2000s in the Champ Car Series or the Kart Series at the time. And they won a lot of races in the Kart Series back in the early 2000s. So it's not the first time that they've been in IndyCar. But a major brand like Toyota, one of the biggest brands in America, they even know is from Japan. They have a big affiliation plant in Kentucky, which is more American, let's be honest with you, than some of the American brands in the United States. But at the same time, I think if you can get a company like Toyota IndyCar, it could be huge. Right now, IndyCar has only Chevy and Honda, and there's been a lot of talks. You know that we've had recently rumors like as early as last year, back when Ferrari was maybe looking at, but those talks apparently have dropped off after they found employment for some of those people to go to different plants. They were going to LMDH while they're going to the WEC Series, and I think that this so could happen. I think that there's a really good chance Toyota is going to jump in IndyCar. I think, again, if they jump in IndyCar, they're going to be in every major form of motorsports. They have huge forms in other motorsports currently at the moment. I think if it does end up happening, they do jump to IndyCar. I think it'll be big for the series. I think there's a really good chance of it happening, but we'll have to wait and see. But there is a very strong possibility that they're going to jump over to IndyCar in the near future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the NY Racing Team. Now, literally just about 30 minutes ago, as I was basically starting to work on today's episode, basically, the NY Race Team posted on their Instagram for the first time basically in over almost a year and basically tagged Team Chevy. Now, apparently there have been reports indicated by multiple reporters that apparently Jonathan Coe, heading under the team, was apparently talking to Rick Hendrick at Phoenix International Speedway. Now, the history of NY Racing Team, we know this. They actually made a start in the Cup Series at the Coke 600 in 2018 with J.J. Yeley. There have been rumors that indicated they were potentially going to run this year's Daytona 500 and run full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series without a charter, but those deals unfortunately fell through, and they did not happen. It felt like a little bit of fraudulent, and unfortunately did not end up happening. But they've thrown themselves back in the fray, and they have said that they've been potentially looking at the next-gen car. I really want to see this happen. I think it'd be really cool to have a new team come into NASCAR, but the big question is, one, what driver are they going to get? That's one thing. If they do come, what driver do they get? I really don't know, to be perfectly honest with you. And number two, are they going to run the whole season without a charter? Honestly, I think if you're going to want to run the full season, especially with the price money going down for the unchartered teams right now, I honestly think it would make a lot more sense to just run on a part-time, basically run on a part-time basis and build your way up. And is the manufacturer going to be Chevy, or are they going to switch manufacturers, or are they going to pull the same crap that they pulled earlier this year? That's something that's going to be determined, but I'm very intrigued to see what happens. I wonder if this story goes through, or they basically just pull a one-time thing and don't end up showing up on the tracks. There's been a couple multiple teams, like the Money Team that never showed up, which I don't know if they're ever going to show up, and the NY Race Team that's not shown up since the 2018 season. So that's one thing that we're kind of wondering to see if something happens in regards to that. But I think that's definitely really interesting that they've posted on their Instagram, because they usually do this once a year and they fall through. So I will see what happens in regards to that. We'll wait and see. But the NY Race Team is once again pulling something out, and maybe we'll see something really soon in regards to that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the upcoming TV deal. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern that a group of NASCAR executive executives traveled to the Ryder Cup in September as guests of NBC Sports, per sources. But NASCAR says it has not started formal talks for the next media deal. And Brian Hurst, who basically does the TV stuff by NASCAR, he says that a deal is in negotiations and contracts do not start until 2023. Now, for those who don't know, NASCAR has a TV deal going on right now that's going to go from 2025 to the 2024 season. And this TV deal is expected to be a massive, it's not expected to be as big of a deal as it has been. And it's been unclear what TV brands are going to be working. There's been speculation about CBS, and there's also been speculation about NBC as well, potentially coming back next year, but it's really unclear. But I personally think that this TV deal is a lot more important. The TV deal is one of the most important things. I think it's actually more important than the next-gen car right now. And I think a lot of things around NASCAR currently are going right now into this TV deal because this TV deal is really, really important for many, many reasons. For instance, number one of the big reasons why this is such a big deal is because that this is going to be where it goes. And will streaming become a major thing for this, like potentially Peacock and races on Peacock? That's something they're going to have to wait on and see. But it's definitely interesting. Negotiations haven't even started. And yet you have people that were potentially spotted at the Ryder Cup in September from NBC. I believe that NBC is going to come back on the next TV deal. I think NBC is coming back. And honestly, if I had to choose, if we have one full broadcaster for the season, I think it's going to be NBC. But NASCAR has not really ever had just one broadcast. They've always had multiple broadcasters. And for the last few years, they've had NBC and Fox on both of them. But I'll be honest, I do think that Fox is potentially going to be out of NASCAR. And the other big question is, what is the other TV brand that is going to get involved? To me, I think that there's a couple other brands that could get involved. One of them, of course, is CBS. There's been rumors and speculation potentially about CBS getting involved. CBS has Asterisk, and they said right now they're not getting involved in other motorsports like IndyCar. There have been talks IndyCar maybe was going to move over to CBS and go over there in 2022, but those deals fell through because they did not have enough room right now on their current schedule. So I don't think, so it's unclear there, but CBS definitely could be there. One thing that could be an issue is the Viacom situation where there's a lot of copyright problems, and Viacom basically copyrights a lot of people when it comes to that situation. So that's something very interesting right there. But this TV deal is going to be very important. I think this TV deal is around a lot of things. I think it's around some of these new manufacturers coming into sport. I think it's around the next-gen car. I think that's why you're seeing a ton of schedule variation right now on the schedule, including the 2021 schedule and somewhat of the 2022 schedule, with a ton of road courses and more potential short tracks coming on the schedule and moving away from the intermediate tracks. Because I think NASCAR is looking at the TV deal, and the TV deal is going to probably bring a lot less money and probably less money going to the tracks. And if the charter system is around in 2025, I think NASCAR is probably going to give a lot more money to those charter teams, and those tracks are going to lose money, which is why NASCAR has also started to focus on attendance. So I think they're looking at that TV deal, and there's not that much longer. I mean, we're pretty soon here. I mean, we're getting really close to TV contracts starting. We don't realize this, but it's going to fly by very, very quickly, and negotiations are expected to start in 2023, and we're probably going to find out which brands or just one brand is going to run. If you have my choice, I run NBC the whole season, but if you have multiple brands, I would potentially have CBS. Let's not go back to ESPN because ESPN has had a lot of problems on its own. But that's something that's really, really interesting and I have to wait on in regards to that. But I think it's a really, really big story. And this TV deal, I think, is one of the most important things that's going to be going into the future, depending on what brands, and is streaming going to be a much more bigger thing, or are they going to focus on streaming with the branding? That's something they have to wait on. Or things going to move behind a paywall in the next streaming deal? I don't think NASCAR is planning to move any of the Cup races behind a paywall, but this is something we have to wait on in regards to that. This is definitely a big story, and we'll see more, hopefully, very, very soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, Jimmie Johnson recently spoke to Graham Benzinger, who does a lot of stuff with Business Insider. BizSider is a very, very popular channel and also does a lot of stuff online as well. They've also had other drivers on there like Brad Keselowski and Kyle Busch on that as well. And Jimmie Johnson talked about some things in NASCAR. He talked about two major points that got a lot of people talking. The first one he said was driver contracts have dropped by 50% over the last 6 years. Now, it's no surprise there. A lot of teams right now have been basically going into a lot more cheaper ways because they've been going with a lot of younger drivers. And they don't have as big as salaries as a lot of the older drivers, because when a lot of the older drivers came in, NASCAR was making a lot more money. But with sponsorship dollars drying up around basically the time the car of tomorrow basically came into NASCAR, they basically started going with a lot of younger drivers that were a lot cheaper, but also brought in a lot of money as well. And teams that therefore were making less money, but so they had to go with paid drivers, and the contracts dropped a lot more. And they're a lot less compared to what they were now. I think there was reported years ago that drivers are making millions of dollars each year in contracts, and sometimes now drivers are not even making $1 million on some of their contracts, which is something really, really interesting that dropped it that much. I mean, it's really interesting over the last 6 years. And you think about the drivers that have left the sport that had big contracts. Tony Stewart, Matt Kenseth, who just retired a few years ago, Danica Patrick, Carl Edwards, among others, Dale Jr., who've left the sport, Jeff Gordon, who've left the sport in the last 6 years. And that was a lot of money that was being brought into the series at that time. So That's very interesting on that point. But the other big interesting point he talked about is that he says that NASCAR schedule is too long and it should be scheduled for 25 to 28 races. I do entirely agree with Jimmy Johnson that the schedule is too long. However, I will disagree that the schedule dropping down between 25 to 28 races, I think that is a little bit short. For me, I would just increase the season from a 36 race season to a 32 race season in NASCAR. I think the season should be no shorter than 30 races right now, but I think the season should be no longer than 32 races. The issues right now in NASCAR's current TV deal, which I think that probably could change after 2024. But with NASCAR's current TV deal, there have to be 36 Cup Series races in a single season. That's why there's been 36 races since the 2001 season. That's why they've kept it there for basically the last 20 years. But one of the issues I also agree with Jimmy Johnson, why I think shortening the schedule would be good, is number one, more people want more. Less quantity, basically less quality, well, something like that. More people, the more people you want it, the more supply, less supply, the more demand it's going to be around a series, and people are going to be begging for more. Another reason, you cut the season earlier, you can end it in early October. NASCAR has talked about that they have wanted to end the season around early October. If you cut 4 races on the season, you basically cut the season a little bit earlier, and you don't get as far in the NFL, and you don't have that major ratings drop, and you can end the season a little bit earlier, and drivers won't complain as much about the length of the season. And the big question is, what tracks get cut? Personally, if I had to make a schedule, I think there's only a few tracks that would get 2 dates, in my honest opinion. I say Darlington keeps 2 their dates because they get good attendance and to be good there. Bristol because they have the Bristol Dirt Race. Martinsville, Charlotte because they have the Charlotte Roval, Talladega, and Daytona. Those are the only tracks that they have to keep 2 of their dates, which means Las Vegas, they lose 1 of their dates. I know that they have a contract to 2031, I believe, but I believe that 1 of their dates needs to be cut, but unfortunately that track potentially won't go. Kansas, I love Kansas Speedway, but I believe that 1 of their dates needs to 100% go. Also, Phoenix, they have the championship week. I think they should only have the championship week race, and the other race of the spring should be cut from the season. Same thing goes for some other tracks, like I think Texas, technically with the All-Stars. I think the All-Stars needs to go somewhere else. A track that doesn't have a NASCAR Cup Series date as well. I think NASCAR should start at some point cutting the races. I think the schedule is too long. I know that with basically one of the reasons why there's been complaints is because, of course, the races are too long. So to me, cutting the length of the races too. Personally, I think cutting the lengths of the races would be better for the views and a better engagement of the fans as well. I think what Jimmy Johnson did say, though, was definitely really, really interesting as a whole. I think it's a big, big story that definitely needs to talk about. I saw no one really talking about this except, I think, Erik Eastep. And I think this definitely is a really, really interesting story that Jimmy Johnson talked about what he grew out of. NASCAR kind of grew out of touch in some ways. But I'm hoping NASCAR is listening. I do hope one day that Jimmy Johnson does return to NASCAR. So I think it'd be really awesome if they can get a driver like Jimmy Johnson to return. But I think Jimmy Johnson has gotten frustrated at points with NASCAR. So it's something that we'll have to wait and see if NASCAR decides to make changes in that regard. But I'm not entirely sure if they're going to change it in those ways, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk about RoushFenway Racing. Now, D.B. Siegel, who works at French's, reported that RoushFenway Racing will be making a major announcement next week on Tuesday, November 16th, regarding the future branding of the team, which is expected to be a name change. It'll be held at the Charlotte Speedway with Brad Keselowski, Jack Roush, and Steve Newmark. And I had to get confirmation from Davey Siegel himself in his DMs, and he basically told me that it'll be taking place in the afternoon. I had confirmation from that is going to be when the meeting is going to be taking place. Now, what is this basically going to be announced? The announcement is it's going to be a change name. The name is expected to be called RoushFenway Keselowski Racing, with Brad Keselowski basically part owner of the team now and going over the team. The team is expected to be either called RFK Racing or just RoushFenway Keselowski Racing, as Brad Keselowski is going to be a co-owner of the team. As time goes over, Brad Keselowski will have much more acquisition of the team, and eventually he's probably going to be taking over a majority role of the organization. The longer he's with the team, the more he's going to be getting into the organization. And Brad Keselowski will be at RoushFenway Racing for the rest of his career as not only a driver, but a co-owner as well. I think that this is going to be huge for RoushFenway Racing to have a guy like Brad Keselowski in all seriousness coming over the team. You have a great driver, a very, very talented driver, I think could revive RoushFenway Racing. I think that team has made some really, really big personnel moves over the last couple years. And again, their team is kind of still like old school, but their team is trying to be a little bit more new school. They were the first carbon neutral race team in NASCAR, which I think is something that's really, really cool. And they've had a lot of other big initiatives that they have been starting to do. And I think a lot of that, of course, is with help of Steve Newmark, who's running the operations. And I think, like I said, this is a huge move that they're going to change their name. RFK Race, that's something you're going to have to get used to, is RoushFenway Keselowski Racing, because that's what's going to be the name for you guys. And I'm really excited about the name. I think it's really, really awesome for sure that they're changing the name to RoushFenway Keselowski Racing. I really actually do like that name. I think it's a really, really cool thing. And again, everyone's expecting to be RoushFenway Keselowski Racing, and that's something that will be announced here very, very soon, but something that I think I'm really excited about for sure, and I'm looking forward to it as a whole. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Dodge. Now, Adam Stern reported earlier today that rumors of Dodge returning to NASCAR are starting to gain traction, and they're starting to gain steam. We talked about this a couple days ago on the channel, that there have been some rumors regarding Dodge potentially returning to NASCAR. And basically, at the State of Sport address, Steve Phelps basically said that NASCAR is not denying or basically admitting that Dodge is 100% coming back, but they said that they have had conversations with Dodge about potentially being one new manufacturer coming. And then he said, well, if we have something to announce, we will at the time. And for those who want a little story on Dodge, Dodge has not been in NASCAR since the 2012 season. They left after 2012. They actually were planning to actually be in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2013, and they were actually going to have Andretti Autosport be a team if Dodge and Kurt Busch was going to be driver, which is one of the reasons why Kurt Busch actually ran the 2014 Indy 500, because he had Andretti backing in that season. He was originally going to have a Cup Series team with that organization. But when Dodge left NASCAR, they had a Genesis car already, but when they left NASCAR in 2013, they haven't been back since. But it's very surprising, too, because they've been building 900 horsepower engines in their cars, in a minivan that's 900 horsepower. So it's definitely really, really surprising. So if Dodge is to come back to NASCAR, when do I think they come back? I do not think they'll come back until the new engine package comes in. Now, when is that new engine package going to come in, perhaps? I believe that the new engine package is going to come in 2024. Expected to come in 2024 with electrification components inside the cars as well. So there's 2 more years with the current engine we're going to have with the next gen car, and then in 2024, there is going to be electrification components coming into the cars next in that season. The other big question I have in regards to that is, who are the potential teams that are going to go over? I know people brought up RoushFenway Racing, and RoushFenway Keselowski Racing, I should say. That team is not switching from Ford. I know people brought it up because Brad Keselowski is coming into the team, but Jack Roush has been affiliated with Ford for basically over the last 40 years. And there's a freaking engine name for Roush Yates motors inside Roush, basically Fords, and Roush Mustangs as well. So I do not think that they're switching over. Even Brad Keselowski taking more of an ownership side of things. I think, for God's sakes, RoushFenway's Jack Roush is going to die in a Ford casket, because I think that's what's going to happen. So I think that the two most likely teams, though, that are going to switch over, the first one is Stewart-Haas Racing. Stewart-Haas Racing, Tony Stewart, we know a little bit about him. They've struggled with Ford this year. Tony Stewart has not been very happy with Ford after he was not allowed to get Kyle Larson. Tony Stewart said he wanted to get Kyle Larson on his team before he went to Rick Hendrick. And Tony Stewart basically said that Ford would not allow him the opportunity to bring him over in that specifics this year, and because Ford basically denied that. And with Kyle Larson with the championship with RoushFenway Racing this year, with Team Hendrick this year, Tony Stewart felt a lot frustrated, and Tony Stewart's even called Kyle Larson the greatest driver he's ever seen, because he really wanted Kyle Larson on the team, but Ford basically denied that opportunity of him going into that team. And also, like I said, his wife, I'm talking about his NHRA team. The NHRA team has not officially been announced for the 2022 season, but his wife and fiance, I should say, Leah Pruitt, has that affiliation with Mopar. And I believe the NHRA team is going to be a Dodge-branded team. So I think that they'd be the first team to jump over. The other team that I think is going to make the jump over, and this is definitely one that I could definitely see really happening, is Rick Ware Racing. Now, Rick Ware Racing has an affiliation next year with Stewart-Haas Racing for only 2 years, in 2022 and 2023. And Rick Ware Racing actually does field Dodge in the Penny Series. So I think that those would be the most likely 2 organizations to go over. But I think a Dodge coming back to NASCAR, I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to be big. I think it'll bring some old school fans back. It'll bring potentially some new teams in, and you never know. You get to see like a team like Chip Ganassi Racing come back and drive with Dodge or other brands. They drove with Dodge when they came back in 2001, so I think it's going to most likely happen. I think it will happen. I think Dodge is coming back to NASCAR in the next couple of years. It's just not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. We'll hopefully hear more about that soon, but Dodge coming back to NASCAR is potentially something that is coming in the future, and I think it is really, really exciting. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kyle Larson. We have talked a lot about Kyle Larson on this channel because Kyle Larson has had a lot of media business. Now, yesterday on the channel, a couple days ago, we talked about him potentially maybe wanting to run an F1 race and also potentially running to run the Indianapolis 500 as well. Well, Kyle Larson recently had an interview with Will Buxton. We know that he's going to be at the season finale race in Abu Dhabi. And he says that he's opening to have a rookie test session in F1 if someone gives him an opportunity to have a rookie test session for Formula One. I think Kyle Larson wants to get behind the wheel of everything. We know how great of a driver Kyle Larson is. Kyle Larson has driven in every kind of vehicle, basically a lot of types of vehicles. He has won so many incredible events. He has won a NASCAR Cup Series championship now. He has won many major dirt events, and including the Knoxville Nationals, the Kings Royal, the Lucas Oil, the Chili Bowl Nationals, the BC 39 Nationals, the Brewery Dirt Classic. He's won so many incredible events throughout his entire career. World of Outlaws events. Last year in 2020, won a ton of events and won a ton of dirt events this year as well. And Kyle Larson has also been open and interested in wanting to run the Indy 500 and has interest in potentially wanting to run an F1 race as well. But I don't think it's realistic he's going to run an F1 race. Now, I do think that Kyle Larson has a lot of chance to run an Indy 500, but I think an open test session would be really, really cool. And I think here's something that I think would be really, really awesome. Why not a driver swap? Remember a couple years ago, I believe it was in 2018, when Jimmy Johnson and Fernando Alonso had a driver swap there. Fernando Alonso got to drive the 48 Cup car at Abu Dhabi, while Jimmy Johnson got to drive a Formula One car in that season. And at the end of the year at Abu Dhabi, once the championship was over, and Fernando was basically, I believe at that time, retiring before basically coming back. And I believe last year, I think he came back, or this year I should say, he did come back to F1. But I think that there are two drivers that should be doing a driver swap. The first driver I'd like to see is Max Verstappen and Kyle Larson swap. Max Verstappen has said he kind of likes NASCAR, and I'd like to see him get an opportunity to at least test a NASCAR car and then have Kyle Larson test the other car. Basically, have a driver swap between Red Bull and them. I think that would be something that would be really, really cool. A lot of fans be able to check it out, and I think we really get to see if Kyle Larson would be capable of getting in that car. I think we all know that Kyle Larson is probably the best driver in North America today, but I think one thing that really, really would set Kyle Larson apart from other drivers is if he was able to do that. And like I said, we know how great Kyle Larson is as a driver, but I think if he extremely was as fast as other F1 guys, I think our eyes would get extremely big because I think he should. I know that dirt cars are not the same as F1 cars, but they're still open wheel cars. So there is some similarities to them because they're all different types of open wheel cars. So I want to see this happen. I absolutely 100% want to see Kyle Larson do an F1 test. I hope that an F1 team like Red Bull decides to try to give him an opportunity. You never really know at this point what team will do it, but I think it would be really, really cool. Maybe, or McLaren perhaps, could give him an opportunity. You get Daniel Ricciardo to test in NASCAR because he's had interest in NASCAR, and get Kyle Larson to test in McLaren. That's something that also be really, really cool. So I'd like to see this happen. I think it'd be really cool to have an F1 NASCAR crossover at the season finale at Abu Dhabi after the race is over, the day after, have a test after that. I think it'd be something really, really cool to watch. I hope it happens, and it's something that I want to see going into at the end of this year. Hopefully he does get an opportunity. I think it'd be cool for him to have an F1 test. So, anyway, that is it for today's NASCAR and IndyCar news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications so you're notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and support page as well. Links description below over that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. Do you think Kyle Larson will have an open F1 test or not? Let me know in the comments below. And do you think that Dodge is going to return NASCAR soon or not? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content on the channel like this. We've got a lot of special content coming out during this winter break, and I'm really, really excited to share a lot of those content for you guys. So I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content on the channel. Take care, everybody.